So I'm Rose. I'm an analyst at BNEF or BloombergNEF, and I focus on renewable fuels. So today I'm just going to be giving some kind of some of the key highlights from two of our recent reports that came out last month, which includes our Sustainable Aviation Fuel Outlook and our first ever Sustainable Aviation Fuel Price Survey. So just to begin with, obviously the aviation sector is under a lot of pressure to decarbonize. A lot of airlines have been announcing net zero targets for 2050. So BNEF has actually been tracking aviation decarbonisation strategies since 2018. And of the 858 strategies that we've tracked between 2018 and June 2025, 44% of them actually are cited as SAF or Efuel, being seen as a kind of a near-term decarbonisation solution. I think the reason for this is because it's available now. And yeah, the reason for this is it's available now. Um, yeah, sorry, apologies. The reason for this is it's available now. And as a result of that, we've actually been tracking the SAF supply. So we have a quarterly supply outlook we look at, which basically tracks capacity around the globe for renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuel. And what we do is every quarter we look at projects that at all stages. So that's whether they're at the original conception, under construction, commissioning, or whether they're already operational. And with that, we're able to develop a kind of a 5-year outlook of potential capacity. So this is based entirely on announcements. And what we see is that between 2023 and 2024, there's been a five-fold increase in capacity. So 2024, there's potentially up to 1.2 billion gallons of SAF capacity available. This varies slightly from the actual production the year before because it includes the kind of capacity of projects that were actually finished construction in that year. So that's 1.2 billion gallons. And then by 2030, we estimate there could be up to 11.2 billion gallons of capacity of SAF available, assuming all projects come online. And on the right here, we actually break it out by technology. So as you can see, there's one technology that's dominating today, that's hydroprocessing, or HEFA, so hydroprocessed esters and fatty acids. And in 2030, we see that the share of that technology could actually shrink to 80% as more technologies start to penetrate the market from 2027 onwards. However, this is assuming that all these new projects do come online. And we actually have a navy line on the bar chart, which represents our base case scenario. So what we do is each project, we add a likelihood assessment score, and then we use a calculation that basically tapers down what we think the potential outlook could be. So in 2030, we estimate 58% of the capacity could come online, which would be 6.5 billion gallons of capacity. So as well as the actual future outlook of supply, we started looking at airports, so where the fuel flows are actually going. So the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, track SAF deliveries, and what they've seen is that there's actually 98 airports receiving ongoing deliveries of SAF, which is up from, and that was during 2024, so that's up from about 80% in 2023. So SAF supply is increasing at airports. And in the left here in the pie chart, we actually have a breakdown of kind of the main SAF hubs around the globe. So that includes Heathrow Airport in London, Amsterdam Schiphol, as well as San Francisco and other California airports are kind of leading in this space. And it's largely down to the fact there's kind of additional financial incentives in these regions. So Heathrow Airport actually has a airport incentives program that's been going on for 4 years. And in 2025 alone, there's 85 million pounds or 115 million US dollars set aside to basically half the SAF premium between, so the additional cost of SAF versus jet fuel. So that's obviously driven a lot of kind of supply towards the airport, and as a result, about 18% of SAF used last year was at Heathrow Airport. Amsterdam Schiphol also had a similar program running from 2022 to 2024, but it's actually ended at the end of 2024, which is interesting because obviously the Refuel EU mandate is beginning this year. And then in California, a lot of fuel's flowing there, and that's just due to the low carbon fuel standard that's in place there, which is a financial incentive program for if you basically refuel and within that state, you'll gain some additional financial incentives. And We also track offtake agreements, which you can see on the right. And in recent years, the number of airports included in the offtake agreements is becoming more diverse. So SAF supply is certainly increasing and flowing to more and more airports. Yeah, so I've spoken a lot about the kind of existing supply, but a big question we do get is how much does it cost? What are the price of SAF? So we decided to carry out the first SAF pricing survey that we've done, where we spoke to players in the industry, including off-takers and producers, and we tried to get a picture of what the price of SAF is historically and potentially into the future. So what I show here is kind of three distinct prices that we've calculated. So on the right, in green, I show the global jet fuel price for 2024, which I just calculated based on demand and kind of the prices at various hubs. So that's just used as a reference. So for 2024, we calculated $2.35 per gallon is the price of fossil-based jet fuel. So that's just a comparison. And then we managed to kind of, I think there was 21 responses and 14 participants. We managed to establish a historic price for HEFA. This is a global price for 2023 to 2025. As I mentioned before, HEFA is the most established technology for SAF production. Majority of SAF was made using HEFA, and that's why it's the historic price. And we found it to be $5.40 per gallon between those years, and that's approximately twice the price of fossil-based jet. However, there is a very large range you see here. So $4.25 to $10.15. That's obviously very vast. And the reason for that is we put it down a bit to regionality. Prices were higher in regions like Asia Pacific, where there's less policy implemented today. However, there's policies coming online in the future. And then the lower end is also potentially in regions where there is more financial incentives available, like the US. And then there's also a third price in this chart, which is eSAF. So that's SAF produced from power to liquids, which is a new technology which produces SAF from captured carbon and green hydrogen. It's very much at pilot stages. There's like a few pilot stage plants online. It's going to be captured under the Refuel EU, and the UK mandate is being required to be used from 2030 and 2028 in the UK. So there's demand for this fuel. So these prices were very much based off future contracts. It is an average global price. And so for the years 2025 to 2028, we saw that it would 1 gallon of eSAF would be $6.55, which is about 7 times the price of fossil-based jet in 2024. So it's significantly higher than HEFA SAF, but we do see this as consistent with our BNEF cost model that we did previously, and we saw that the price of eSAF today is approximately 5 to 9 times the price of, the cost of production is approximately 5 to 9 times the cost of fossil jet. So it's consistent with what we see as costs. And again, there's a huge range of $7 per gallon to $23.75 per gallon. And this is just down to the nascency of the technology. A lot of it's based off future prices, and a lot of different startups are approaching new technologies that they're costing for the first time. So, and the difference between the HEFA SAF and eSAF is just to do with how established technologies are. HEFA is a much more mature technology. When we look at the kind of factors influencing SAF, here I've broken out the price of HEFA SAF from 2023 to 2025 on a global scale. And what we saw was that in 2023, HEFA SAF was pretty much consistent at $5.85, then becoming $5.90 in 2024. So it's a very consistent price across those 2 years. But then we see it come down in 2025. These are prices up to the 1st of May of this year. We see it come down to $4.95. And participants of this study cited various reasons, including uncertainty around feedstocks, as well as a supply-demand imbalance, leading to kind of having influence on pricing. And another potential influence is the contract structures are important in SAF offtake agreements, because they're majority of them are bilateral agreements, so an agreement between two parties. And they can be based off various structures, and one of the most common is indexed to jet fuel, which basically means that that the price is more reliant on the kind of jet fuel demand rather than being linked to the cost of production. So here in purple, I show the global average jet fuel price in the same year, and it decreased by 20% from 2023 to 2025, whereas SAF decreased by 16%. So there is some correlation there, but it may not fully explain it. So the influence of the jet fuel price could be having a factor. Another major factor could potentially be feedstock. So here I show the average used cooking oil prices in China and the US from 2023 to 2025. These are yeah, so used cooking oil was actually the most popular feedstock used in the survey, followed by tallow. So pretty much all waste fats and oils used in the SAF captured in the survey. And as you can see here in both China and the US, the price dips down and then it either plateaus or goes up again, showing that actually feedstocks might not be one of the main influences on the price, despite we carried out a HEFA cost model, which attributed feedstock as the main cost component at about 70% of the cost of production. So it seems that it's not having a direct influence despite being a costly component. Yes, so and I think a big factor on this is, as I mentioned earlier, the contract structure. So we also asked for information on the contract structures of the participants, and what we saw is there was 3 different contract structures listed. As I mentioned, indexing to existing commodity price, which was the most popular. Majority of them were indexed to jet fuel, which means that you basically just sever the ties to the feedstock costs of the participating off-takers or airlines. 2/3 of those that participated, 2/3 of their contracts were indexed to jet fuel, which makes sense because these companies are used to hedging against jet fuel prices. They're not familiar necessarily with the kind of feedstock market, which can be volatile. It's linked to other industries like agriculture, food industry. So it makes sense that they would gravitate towards indexing to jet fuel. For the second most popular was the set price, which is basically when the 2 parties agree a price that won't change. This makes sense in terms of, okay, you can lock in your supply for the future, as well as it guarantees kind of financial stability for producers in the future and revenue. However, it could leave either the buyer or the seller in an uneconomic position. Say the price dramatically changes, because both, as I said, both jet fuel price and SAF price could dramatically change, which then could put you in an unfavorable position. And then finally, cost plus, which was the least popular contract structure, is based on adding a price premium to the cost of production. So obviously it's hugely beneficial to producers because the guaranteed revenue of coming years. And then it also means that they can there's less risk with the feedstock volatility. However, as I mentioned before, for off-takers, this is a less popular option because it's less, it is, at least isn't linked to jet fuel demand necessarily, but is very much linking yourself to both SAF demand and feedstock demand. But yeah, so I'm just going to finish there. Yeah, this was just a quick kind of high-level run-through of our SAF pricing survey, and I'm going to pass it back over to Ross. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that insight, Rose. I think I can see a whole host of questions already coming in, which are quite technical questions. To everybody who's asking those questions, we will, of course, do our best to get to them, but I would also strongly, strongly recommend reaching out to the team, and there will be contact details coming up later towards the end of the webinar as well, so that you can do that. But we will try to get to as many of them as we can. Now that we've got the findings from the survey and they set us up fantastically for what's to come next, our panel of experts are going to be discussing precisely what we've just learned about the price gap between different pathways, pricing models, how incentives shape pricing, and the market outlook for SAF. Joining Rose will be Mike Fulton, the Chief SAF guy at FedEx, Ken Hill, the Managing Director at Biocarbon Strategies, and of course our moderator, Anna Dialanas Davies, the Renewable Fuels Team Lead at BNEF. So without further ado, Anna, over to you.
Thank you, Roz, and hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, we have a lot of questions in the chat. I'll try and link some of those into the discussion we're about to have. And as she said, any that we don't get to, our panelists and myself will try and follow up as best we can on them. But I wanted to just sort of dive in. We have about half an hour to discuss SAF pricing. Clearly a lot of interest, clearly not a lot fully known about SAF pricing, but luckily Michael and Ken should be able to help us out. It sounded like, Rose, the price you were quoting from the survey, right, was about $5.40, I think, for HEFA SAF in the last few years. And then EF-SAF over the next few years coming in around $16, if I have that correct.
Yeah.
Up to the 20s, probably a pretty big range there. Michael, you're actually in the industry, buying, selling SAF. I guess I'll start with you, Michael. From FedEx's perspective, do those prices sound about right to you? What have you been seeing in the market so far?
Yeah, so I would agree with the assessment. We're seeing very similar prices. I agree that HEFA is the fuel that we're able to get today. And that price is typically why we're able to get it today and willing to get it today. It's closer to what we need it to be. At price parity is what we're seeking, honestly. And so I would say overall that every point that I saw discussed that Rose brought up was right, that the different ranges were correct. We're seeing when we start comparing HEFA against other technologies, she didn't mention a few others that are out there yet, but the two key ones is the difference between the SAF and e-fuels, because what Europe is doing and what the UK is doing to mandate those fuels in. So I do agree with all of that pricing information I saw.
Okay, interesting. And Ken, how about on your end? Does that sort of in line with what you're saying? You're on mute at the moment, I think.
Yes, thanks. I think I do agree. I think it's interesting when you look at HEFA and e-fuels, you're kind of bracketing in all the pricing from various different pathways. I mean, as Michael said, you've got other technologies like alcohol to jet and Fischer-Tropsch, co-processing, pyrolysis, others that are in that category. They're kind of bracketed in between HEFA and e-fuels. And HEFA is by far going to be most likely the cheapest, and e-fuel is the most expensive, and the others kind of lie somewhere in between. And so understanding what those pricing dynamics can do to consumers, to buyers, off-takers, and then how those pricing structures and contracts are going to be needed to be structured to get projects built and get supply into the supply chain is really going to be important as we go forward here.
And let's pick up on that point, because Rose talked a bit about the structures of those contracts. And we've had a few questions in the chat about structures of contracts. How are contracts coming up now? Like, are they long-term contracts? I was listening. I think Rose, a lot of yours might have been batch. Were they? That was one of the questions in the chat. Are they on batch contracts, or are they long-term?
Yeah, they were
from the survey.
Batch one, mainly batches, just over a shorter term. So it wasn't like 5-10 year agreements. It tended to be batch ones. I think the longest ones were over a year that the SAF could be delivered, but often they were just like a batch for 1 month.
Okay, interesting. Michael, does that sound about right for what FedEx is lining up, or how are you procuring SAF?
We have two different approaches right now. We have the batch approach, as it's being called. We're surveying what we can buy today. We recently announced that we are taking jet fuel into LAX. That is a short-term batch contract by the definitions we're using now. And then we're also looking at long-term offtake arrangements, those that have longer time horizons beyond 5 and 10, often that being asked for 15, 20, and 25, I've even heard. Those are incredibly difficult to lock into a high price for an extended period of time like that. And with HEFA being about all that's available out there today, and we've seen production increase, a significant amount of production increase, that has given us the ability to focus on these batch term agreements right at the moment, where we'll take it for a short period of time. A year or less is typically what we're trying to do. And what do you think, Ken?
Yeah, I think that the one thing that we have to understand is that you're likely to see shorter term agreements for things like HEFA. Because if you look at the capacity that is currently in the world today for HEFA SAF, you're looking at the Nestes, Diamond Green, Eco Series, Marathon, big companies who invested into big projects. So they can afford to be able to look at shorter term contracts. It's when you start to look at how do you finance and develop bigger projects, more expensive projects that maybe have higher cost structures, lower carbon typically, but also higher cost structures. That's where you start to see the need for those longer term contracts. And that's where I know it's really hard for guys like Michael and FedEx and and a lot of airlines to be able to sign up for 10, 20-year contracts because there's so much unknown out there. But in order to get those things financed and get them built, so it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg. In order to get those projects financed, they're going to need that to be able to get the debt and the equity raise they're going to need to build. I mean, most of the projects I see, if you're at least $1 billion, if not $2 billion, maybe as an average size for a lot of these projects. So in order to get the debt and equity funding for those, you almost have to have longer term contracts. So I think that we have to kind of bifurcate and look at HEFA as one scenario. The other technology is going to be different.
Yes, that's so true. These long-term contracts based on new technologies are key to helping them get started. That pricing, though, is hard to lock in because, it's who steps forward first. So if one airline or two or three airlines step forward and engage in that activity, they may miss out on an opportunity. So they're the ones who basically paid for it to get put in place, where there's far more than just 10, 15 airlines in the world. There's thousands of airlines in the world. There's just a small number of very large ones that could take a significant number of fuel. So there's that chicken and egg with who's going to step forward. The passenger airlines, the freighter airlines, working together, trying to develop some kind of a pooled mechanism to help enable this fuel. But do we really want to end up in a world where fuel costs 5 to 7 times more, and on the promise that the price will come down? That's a hard thing to swallow at this stage, to lock into that high uncertainty, that high price for a long period of time.
I think that's a good point to talk about supplements to pricing, right? So there's the physical cost of producing the fuel, and then there's all the other revenue potentials from the back of it. And we've actually been getting a lot of questions at BNEF around this. It's a big, interesting component. So maybe that's the next piece. Is there's sort of two components I can see coming into this, right? Policy and environmental attributes. Policy is a big can of worms. Let's bite off the last one, the second one first. Scope 3 emissions, or environmental attributes credits. How does that factor into the price? Or is that a sizable portion of revenue? How much can that help to bring the price down for SAF procurers, airlines, shipping companies?
Yeah, I could lead off on this one. It's of interest at this stage. If you think about it, let me just frame it up this way. Let's frame it up around the e-fuels, considering that was the really hard one. We have to be able to close that price gap. And when you monetize that scope 3 based on the difference you pay, what you would have paid for Jet A and what you're paying for the e-fuels gallon instead, that price difference in the carbon reduction yield, the scope 3 and scope 1 that we're all after, does have material value that has interest to some of our customers. I'm sure other airlines have interested customers too. When you look at what that is, it's well in the e-fuels, it's well over $2,000 to $3,000 per metric ton reduction. And we would really like that to be well under $100 per metric ton reduction. When you're competing against HEFA, for example, that is, we're seeing numbers coming down on that because the price of the fuel is coming down on that. It's getting closer to Jet A. They're going to be competing, those e-fuels, aspiring e-fuels producers are going to be competing against $250 and under per metric ton. And so for the exact same metric ton, what do you want to pay for? And that's going to be interesting to see how that works over the long term, but it does have material value. There are customers interested in it. And I often look at it as what is the net outcome we can achieve? If we pay more for the SAF gallon, we monetize that. Is there demand out there? So getting back to the offtake construct. So if you have an offtake that it just has to be 10 years to get that e-fuels plant built, And they're asking us to sign up at an expensive price, typically an e-fuels, aspiring e-fuels producer, asks us to sign up for that long-term at a high price, and they want us to speculate on the back end on what we can do with the Scope 3. And I often think, wouldn't it be nice if we have a long-term commercial customer who will take all of that Scope 3? And if they will, and they'll lock into that price, or at least follow the price of the fuel being moving, then maybe we can afford to go buy that, or at least, close the gap in some way. You got some additional thoughts on that, Ken?
Yeah, I think one thing I think we have to remember when it comes to environmental attributes, you kind of got a bifurcated market when you look at this globally, right? You've got the mandated markets, and you've got the incentivized, or the carrot versus stick kind of thing, right? And I think the environmental attributes, to be able to sell those and generate value for those, is a critical piece from a project developer standpoint, and getting something financed. That's a critical piece that is starting to really evolve. I mean, really only over the last year have you started to really see and people to understand how they can sell Scope 3 emissions separately from selling them through the airline or from the buyer on the offtake side. And in some ways that frees up guys like Michael and other passenger airlines, because the developer is taking the offtake risk from that perspective, right? And at least for the US in particular, you're looking at price stacks where the value of the SAF on an energy basis is not that much more than maybe Jet A, maybe a little bit of a green premium on that. But then you're looking at the environmental attributes, and up until July 4th, the tax attributes and other things that we're able to put things together and be able to get something financed. The mandated market's a little bit different because you've got the penalty structure there, whether it is HEFA or e-fuels and other types of fuels, depending on where you are, Asia and other markets. So that you have to really be able to navigate that a little bit differently. But the only way I see SAF in any flavor, e-fuels, alcohol to jet, or other, is they're able to get value for those environmental attributes. And that's where these markets are evolving, and we'll have to kind of see where that plays out. But I mean, there's some positive signs there. The bigger question, I think, is going to be, how deep is that market going to be? And how many people are going to be really willing to put up money for those Scope 3 emissions? And there's, in the US, of course, there's the RFS as well as kind of environmental attributes, LCFS and others. But I think that's going to be a big question, is how deep is that market going to be? And how long is that going to run? And so we'll have to kind of see how that plays out, because it's still pretty new.
Yeah. Yes, I'm thinking of something else in addition to what you're saying there, Ken, as well. And I see it too. These e-fuel producers, the ones who want to build plants, let's talk about that mandate too, as part of that. So the 1.2% creates a guaranteed demand. You have to do this, or you're going to pay a high penalty. And right now it's looking like the penalties are going to be well over 2 times the price we would have paid for the gallon of getting that e-fuel. So some horrific economic conditions that are rolling out right at the moment.
And just to confirm for listeners, this is Europe's policy.
Yes, yes. EU, Europe, that's what I'm referring to when I say that. So at the same time, the producers that want to build out these plants would like us to take more than the 1.2%. And the reality is fuels aren't blended to 1.2%. They're typically blended to higher blend percentages. They end up in the 20, 30, 40, as much as 50%. And so they want us to buy e-fuel not on a 1.2% blend, but a much higher blend. And then we have to go capture that value some other way. And there's a strange situation that could roll out. It's yet to be tested and understood. Is, do we have to pay the higher price for the first 1.2%? And then we're going to see some relief on above that, because it's subjected to market conditions, where the 1.2% was subjected to mandated conditions and the price differences. And do we roll over that 1.2% and as it scales over time to the next number? I can't remember what the next number is, but it will scale over time on how much of that must be e-fuels. I'm curious, I haven't seen an economic model or a presentation from the from an e-fuels producer yet that kind of addresses that.
I think that's a very interesting point. I mean, you're basically looking at trying to sell that as an incremental value. And if you, that would get to how you price and structure your contracts on, at least on a volume basis, so that you can at least make sure you're covered on your debt service and being able to break even on the mandated volume, and everything else becomes incremental. That could be a very interesting dynamic if it starts to play out.
Kenneth, have you seen any sort of pricing structures or approaches from project developers? How are they trying to go about?
Yeah, I've been seeing, it depends on the technology, honestly. I think as we said, HEFA is a little bit more straightforward. E-fuels is really hard because it is so expensive, and they really need those long-term high price contracts. And most of those volumes, there's really no incentive to do e-fuels consumption, at least much in the US. So all that's really Europe and the UK and other potential jurisdictions. But I do think that other types of technologies, I've seen different kind of pricing structures, everything from tolling contracts to airlines kind of guaranteeing the price stack, and then being able to go up and down on the environmental attributes, and kind of protecting the developer in a way. And then there's floor pricing that is indexed on something, but that floor pricing is going to be above Jet A. It's going to be something that is going to make the developer financially viable. And from a financing point of view, you have to remember that too much commodity risk is hard to get debt financing, especially for newer technologies. And HEFA is starting to not be so new, but other stuff is still pretty new. And so in order to take that risk, the financiers are going to need pretty good offtakes. And so when you look at things like Renewable Fuel Standard or LCFS, those are more like commodity markets. It depends on, it changes from year to year. Those numbers go up and down. And so a bank is going to look at that a little bit more skeptically and more like a commodity. Tax credits a little bit different. All those just changed in the US. Those are more kind of fixed and more bankable. But you have to kind of look at all these different elements. But a Scope 3 contract, say it's a 10-year contract for a Scope 3 emissions, that's pretty bankable, as long as it's a good counterparty and that sort of thing. So all this has to be dialed into any kind of developer. If you're looking at Fischer-Tropsch technology, where you're looking at something like $10, $11 a gallon to be able to make things work, you might be looking, e-fuels at 16 to 20, as Rose said, and alcohol to jet somewhere in between the Fischer-Tropsch and HEFA probably. So you're looking at everything above Jet A, and how do you actually get that value and generate that value and capture it in order to pay off your debt service? Is really the way this is playing out. So I'm seeing different financing structures or contract structures because people are trying to be creative. And there's no sort of standard yet for the other non-HEFA technologies, at least.
Okay, and you've also kind of alluded to this, and we're getting a lot of questions in the chat around different regions might have different pricing come about by policies, right? Like Europe has the mandates, which have huge penalties. The US has a lot of these financial incentives, but there's also been all the changes with the One Big Beautiful Bill. What do you see regionally in terms of SAF pricing? Are there going to be two different SAF prices coming up, or is it just going to be one market pools all the SAF? The other one is uneconomic. How's that developing in your eyes?
I think that we're at risk of it being very different. With the Big Beautiful Bill and the changes to the 45Z tax credit in particular, I think that's going to hamper SAF production in the U.S. That is not slated for export. I think you could likely see, ironically, some e-fuels projects that go quicker in order to get in the safe harbor under the 45V Victor tax credit for clean hydrogen. So I expect some of them to move faster. And I think that other people will try to move fast if they can maybe look at, well, people can be very creative. And so there is one thing that's kind of carved out in the 45Z requirement or new changes, which is about animal manure and to get higher tax credits versus $1. And so that's going to be very interesting to see how people can play that out. And what does that really mean? That means, natural gas from digesters suddenly becomes very valuable, and the CO2 from digesters, and we'll have to kind of see with the guidance from Treasury. But I think that those changes are going to put a hamper on the U.S. market and maybe drive people to export more. And that means, ironically, that if they're going to export, they're going to have to be able to meet CORSIA requirements. And now that's going to change the way that you trickle down to the agricultural way that these things are created. So there's a lot of changes, and I think that the mandated markets will be look at one way, and it's going to be interesting to see how the other mandated markets, where with Japan, I know Rose had some of this, and some of the other BNF requirements. Malaysia, Indonesia, Japan, Korea, they've got mandated markets coming in. And what is that really going to mean? We don't know all the details of that yet. And so does that copy more what Europe and the UK are doing, or is it something less stringent? Hopefully it is less stringent and not so heavily e-fuels, I'm hoping. But I think that you are going to see kind of some different markets here. And, developers and producers are going to try to figure out what is the best market to go to. And that could just mean differences in the U.S.
Yeah, that's similar to what I'm seeing as well. I mean, there's just, I'd like to look at 3 different markets right at the moment. We got the U.S. market, we got EU and kind of UK, the way they're tracking. And then we have the APAC, which you're talking about as well. And the U.S. is an incentive-based market at this stage. So a producer here is getting more than one revenue stream because of the incentives. They're getting a revenue stream that is based on their production, sometimes based off of their blending of that gallon with a conventional fuel as well. They're getting possible state level credits depending on where that fuel is being uplifted. And this affects the pricing, which you would think that, and the data supported that Bloomberg has presented, that Rose has shared with us today, that people are going to go where the cheapest price is. And so if we've got this lower cost production capability, because of the producers being able to get those other revenue streams, it does make sense that ours will continue to grow because now we can take it to Europe, possibly, just depends, as long as it meets the requirements. And we could take it into the APAC, and we're going to have domestic use. It just makes sense that the markets are going to follow the price, and the incentives are going to drive that price low. Now, if you got in the mandated environments, it's forcing a price in, and if you don't pay the price, you're going to pay a penalty with it. And so we're yet to see how this works long term. If it's going to turn into a lot of fuel being produced in the United States and exported into countries that have mandates, and how they're going to, how these mandated environments are going to manage that.
And I think that one thing here that's important with and you mentioned the big beautiful bill, Anna, the new incentives there are really going to drive, especially HEFA producers or technology, to renewable diesel, right? And so renewable diesel was already cheaper to make than SAF, And now it's essentially equated from a tax credit perspective with SAF. And so I think you're going to, and you also have the double barrel effect of the renewable fuel standard, renewable volume obligations that are proposed by EPA, which are really high from the biomass-based diesel side. So I think you're going to see a lot of people shifting production away from SAF, the current producers maybe, to more diesel, and that could really restrict the market in the U.S. So what does that mean to guys like Michael when the volume in the U.S. starts to go down and they want to buy more? I don't know. Does that drive up the price? That's going to be an interesting dynamic to see what starts to play out. Those producers, if they really want that higher value, I think they're going to almost have to export because they're not incentivized to do otherwise. Unless Mike wants to pay more, which he probably doesn't want to.
Yeah, we want to pay Jet A parity, conventional Jet A parity, which there's some creative mechanisms out there right now. There's some people trying to stand up a new index as a way to measure against, to lock in to that new index for contracts. There's some people out there working on that. And I see some questions popping up in the webinar chat. Are we going to delay those, or are we able to address?
I've been looping some of them into the discussion here, but I think we probably only have time for one or two more. And I think I'll probably focus the last ones on the outlook, because I've been talking, Rose showed our supply, and we've been talking about prices out till 2028, 2030. In the SAF world, that's fairly short term still. So if we're kind of trying to look out to pricing, where do you see it going? And maybe actually I want to start with Rose, because I think you asked this of some of the survey participants. So when we think about forward-looking SAF, is it going to be higher or lower than at the moment? This is one of those debates Ken and Mike were just having. So good time to sort of get to our outlooks. Rose, what was the take on the survey? Well, let's start there.
Well, it's very interesting to actually, because there was a really distinctive split between the off-takers and producers. So it just kind of showed the kind of lack of harmony maybe in the market. So majority of off-takers, those buying SAF, said they would either be the same or go down in price in the future, and those producing SAF said it would get more expensive. About 70% of producers said they thought it would go up in price. So it kind of inconclusive results. I think a lot of it was the survey we asked the questions before it was the first half of this year, so I think there was a lot of uncertainty around things like the 45Z, what was going to happen with the tax credits in the US, led to some of the uncertainty. Other reasonings, we thought the participants thought the price might go down is also, as we mentioned already, kind of scope 3 emission and environmental attributes. So I'd say they were kind of some of the key takeaways, as well as I think the uncertainty around the EU penalty as well. It'd be good when that comes out, especially for eSAF, we'll have like a price ceiling, which will also kind of help with stability markets. We kind of know what potentially the prices could be. But it's interesting to kind of see that the off-takers and producers are still very much at odds, I would say.
Just one thing to add to that, I think that when it comes to the outlook, there's a lot of uncertainty here in lots of different ways. But one thing, I'm talking to a number of technology providers who provide SAF production technologies and licenses of technologies in the last couple of months, and they have their book is really pretty full. I mean, like over 100 plants on the drawing board to make SAF around the world. And that's just a couple of them, technology providers. It's not everybody. So, and maybe only 20% were in the US. So there's a big appetite to try to build some of these plants. And so I think you will see supply increase. And the innovation on the HEFA side, I'm already seeing as well, where people are coming up with new technologies or tweaks to technologies to lower the cost and drive down that and get some of those efficiencies. And that's starting to happen. That's good news. And so I think there's a lot happening here in the space, and that's going to be playing out.
Can we tease that out a little bit, Ken, on the what it takes to build a SAF plant? It's not like you start one today and you've got something up and running within 9 months. It takes 4 or 5 years to get these things built, tested. It's 2025, and we got mandates coming on in 2030. And pointed all the Efuel plants that are under construction today that are moving forward, that are going to be able to help us meet that. There are some, you're right, there are some pilot e-fuels that I heard you mention this earlier. I'm aware of who and what that looks like today, but scaling and getting there fast enough to be able to meet that EU demand coming on in 2030 and UK's demand as well, it's going to be quite challenging. Yeah, and you mentioned the scope 3. And again, I tend to look at when we're looking at fuels, looking at these new fuels, looking at even the HEFA, that we got 2 value streams we have to manage. We got that liquid molecule that we need to manage, and we also have the other value stream, which is important to us and our customers, and that's that carbon reduction value. That has material value, and how we address and manage that. That is an interesting one for me, because it requires trust, an incredible amount of trust in the world. And there's been a lot of that trust broken over the years on the different carbon offsetting schemes that are out there today, and how we get some trust built into a system that bringing a high-priced carbon inset into the market. So that's key. We haven't really touched upon that, on how we're going to manage that. And I don't think that was the intent, but it is key to the pricing structure and how we're going to land on the net price outcome from SAF purchases in a way that we can afford the fuel and our customers can afford to use our services because of the pricing we're having to pay for that fuel.
Right. No, and you're absolutely right, Mike. I think people forget how long it takes to build these things. And 4 or 5 years is absolutely, and that's starting like yesterday, right? And so, and 2030, some of my European clients, they're kind of okay, 2% until 2030, but they're kind of freaking out about the 6% in 2030. Like, how the heck are we going to get that volume? Because you got to be building it now. And that's a good. Hey, my sense is this is gonna take. When you look at the amount of aviation fuel and projected increase in aviation fuel by the next 25 years, you're going to have all of the above, and co-processing is a big piece of that. But those volumes are going to be really tough, pretty tight come 2030, I think. And you're right on the scope 3s. The good news there, I think, compared to, say, the last decade of people buying offsets that are building or planting trees somewhere and this sort of thing, you're getting much better certification structures that are starting to evolve there. And I think that looks like, and you're right, there has to be something that's trustworthy and people can really believe in. But I think that some of those certification processes seem to be evolving in a way that's going to be pretty good. So we'll have to see, but hopefully, fingers crossed, we're getting to where we really want to be.
Anna?
Yeah, I think that's a big question. One of the other questions we've had, and maybe I'll leave it with this, is we've touched on it following up. When we look ahead, right, 2030, 2035, how will SAF be priced? Is it going to be like a commodity price, or is it always going to have a CI score attached? Will it be priced based on technology and feedstock and location? How does this world evolve is one of the questions we're trying to tease out. It might be an unanswerable question, but I'd love to hear your views.
So right now it does seem to be rolling out tied to the scopes, the scope 1 and scope 3 on what we could do with that. I can't tell you what 2050 is going to look like, but that is what we're seeing today. And that's because we're trying to figure out a way to pay for it. And that's one way of doing it. There is a question in the queue talking about, can the pricing be tied to carbon intensity? Well, in essence, that's what we're talking about. It's the market price of what we pay for the fuel monetized based on the carbon intensity of the fuel. So I for quite a few years now, I've been believing that fuel is going to compete on that carbon intensity value. I mean, there are some out there that I'm not sure that the world's ready for it, that the acceptance is there. But there are a deep negative number of fuels out there based on sequestration mainly. And so if you think about it, let's just answer that CI question this way. If I pay $1 premium for a fuel that provides an 80% reduction, and I can pay $1 for a fuel that provides a 290% reduction, which fuel do you think I'm going to buy if the Scope 3 has market value? It's going to be that it does depend on the price of the fuel too. All right. So why would somebody that is offering a minus, a 290% reduction, that's a deep negative CI score. Why would they price it the same as somebody that's selling the fuel with an 80% reduction? Why would they do that? That's two different variables that have to be looked at. And it's another thing I focus on internally is just, the fuel buying teams haven't had to manage that for years inside of airlines, decades. They buy based on ensuring that the supply is secure at the lowest cost they could possibly secure that supply to make sure we have enough fuel to fly our airplanes. Now they have to start thinking about how am I going to buy fuel at a low cost that comes with a carbon reduction value, and how are we going to manage that moving forward too? The professionals on the front line that are going to be managing that are there's a lot of work that has to be done there too.
Yeah, and I think that valuing that carbon is absolutely critical. I mean, you can imagine the scenario that Mike's talking about. If you're buying, let's say, negative 100 CI fuel, and you're blending it with a gallon of Jet A, that's the way to get to net zero, right? And so what is the value of that carbon reduction in order to meet the net zero targets that an airline or stockholders of an airline might have? So I mean, that's a key ingredient here. Another thing to realize as well, to your question, Anna, around pricing in the future, I struggle to see SAF getting to Jet A parity anytime in my career anyway, which may not be that much longer, but because I think there are a couple of key factors here. Yes, you'll see innovation, the cost will come down. I fully believe, absolutely 100% believe that. But I also know that if you look at projections on oil production and consumption, there's projections of maybe peak consumption of oil in the early 2030s. And as EVs start to proliferate more and you have less demand, more electrification in various different ways, you start to see oil production come down. Well, with lower demand, you get lower price. And that means the price of Jet A goes down as these other things are happening. So to meet that lowering price is going to be really hard in the 2030s and 40s, I think. So I struggle to ever see that it gets to Jet A parity, at least in the next 10, 15 years, in my mind.
Well, we need those partners. We need them to produce that Jet A because it still today has to be blended.
Oh,
so
yeah.
that supply chain has to be there. And it's still early on how those incumbent producers are going to be a player in the SAF market yet. If you think about what's working today, the brownfield conversions are working. The greenfields are yet to be proven. And what I mean by that is brownfield, meaning that there's an existing facility that is either idle, decommissioned, can be recommissioned and used, or there is just a choice that's made to take an existing production line and convert it over to a different fuel type. Those are the brownfield conversions, and those seem to be working just fine today. That we're seeing that happen. Co-processing is another alternative. Lower capital requirement to get in and start producing co-processed fuel. But the green fields require an incredible amount of capital, typically in the range of about $1 billion to $3 billion to build these plants. And if you look at the $1 billion to $3 billion, look at the outputs of these plants, and start comparing it to what the incumbents are doing today, it's going to take a while to disrupt's not the right word here, because I see the oil, the incumbents, I'm just going to call them that, the incumbents that are supplying us today, we just don't know how they're going to look at this market and how they're going to be involved in this market going forward.
Somebody in the chat said we're going to have to meet in 5 years to see how this is all going. I agree, or at least meet in Houston in October. But Thank you so much for joining. We have 56 questions. We'll try and follow up on them. And I want to hand it back to Roz to sort of wrap us up.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you all of you for that brilliant discussion. I know it always feels like the case that an hour is never enough, but here, really, an hour was simply not enough. Thank you, Rose, for presenting as well. I think there was a load of really useful information in there. To all of our audience, thank you for joining us. If you want to see that whole presentation that Rose did and a little bit more detail as well, if you scan the QR code that's on screen now, it will take you straight to see that. We will also be sharing the recording of the webinar and the slides themselves within the next sort of week or so. But if you want access immediately, scan that QR code. Or you can reach out to Ludo, the account manager at BloombergNEF, at the email that's also shown on screen. As Anna said, if you want to learn more about everything that's been discussed and how pricing outlook continues to develop, join Ken and Michael and the BNEF team in Houston on October 14th to 16th for our North America Congress. And then finally, if you go to www.sustainableaviationfutures.com, you can get full details of all of our events, which we're partnered with BNEF for, our training courses and SAF Spotlight. So just finally, thank you again to the panel, to our attendees, and I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your day.